Here we go. Most of you know me, but those that don't, I see one or two there. I'm Beth Achenbach. I'm an out lesbian and an out Jew. And when I say that, I don't mean that I go around telling everyone, hello, I'm a Jew, and hello, I'm a lesbian, hello, I'm a Jew, hello, a lesbian. What I do is I just talk about myself and I don't hold back anything. So I say things like my wife, or back in the day, I was dating this girl, or I'm going to Shabbat services. And sometimes it's a twofer. I say my wife and I are lighting Shabbat candles. So I just give people the air that I'm welcoming and they're welcome to ask me questions. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because I recently have been seeing some chatter about this new movement. And instead of coming out of the closet, it's let people in. And I read a quote. Does anyone here know about Queer Eye on Netflix? It's a show on Netflix. A few gay men transform people and their spaces. And one of the guys on there, Karamo Brown, he has a background in social work. And he has a quote where he says, coming out gives the power to the other person to accept or deny you. But when you invite people in, you hold the power. So on that note, I'm inviting in our spiritual leader at Temple Beth-El, Rabbi Leanna Morit. So inviting people in, it's a very Jewish thing to do, right?
You bet. And I'm not gay and I'm not trans. So that puts me, I don't know if it puts me at a little bit of disadvantage. I hope not. But I grew up in a delightfully oblivious home, which I never thought of as being welcoming or unwelcoming. Nobody ever told me that there was anything untoward or off or different. So what I kind of discovered was that, oh my God, there are some people that have a problem with people in different life circumstances. And that was my learning. My learning wasn't learning, it was sort of unlearning, if that makes sense. And as a matter of fact, I very clearly remember that when I was in middle school, one of my dear friends from camp had two moms. So it was like, oh, it was whatever. But it's like I had to think back and think, oh, right, I did, grow up that way, which I hope makes me an ally and a kindred soul and a kindred spirit. So I'm delighted to explore these topics of welcoming, of diversity, of embracing, and also to, if you will, like pop a couple of holes in what I hear disturbingly as sort of religious stereotypes or Jewish religious stereotypes of being anti this and anti that. And do things culturally evolve in some way? Of course, we know it, we live it, we're pained by it, right? But I also really looking forward to sort of peeling back where some of these both come from, so that we can really sort of say, well, is this really what we think it is or not, and compare it to other things and take a critical eye. So I'm going to jump right in.
We're going to jump in. I want to thank you for being willing to have this topic with us. And those of you that don't know, this is Jersey City Pride Month, August is. And at the end of the talk, I'll give you a couple of dates, at least let you know when Jersey City Pride is. And I also have created a resource page. And what I'll probably do is email that to everyone that registered, because it has actual live links in it, and it's like 3 pages long. So and as we go, if anyone has a question, just feel free to pop it in the chat. And if we don't get to it as we're talking, we'll back up and get to it But we've been in the other talks we've been pretty good about catching it as it comes up, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we should just start with these Torah texts that were the basis of, you know, of why we think homosexuality, or we did, is forbidden halakhically, right? Is that the right thing to say?
Halakhically means according to Jewish law. Yes. So, there are these two kind of two sentences in Torah. It's not all over Torah, which very clearly say, I'll read the first one. It's Leviticus 18. You shall not lie with a male as you would with a woman. It is, I'm going to use the Hebrew, a toeva. And it was interesting. Beth and I had a conversation. What do you mean? What does that mean? And we came up with two different ways that it gets translated. One was an abomination, and the other one was what? Abhorrent?
Yeah, abhorrent.
Abhorrent, yeah. And then the other one uses the same word, and it says, if a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed abominations. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. So they're there, and as clear as they are, it definitely warrants digging a little bit deeper as into these words. So not as an apologetic, but for centuries, people would say, well, this is spoken to a man, so it's not applicable to a woman, right? Eventually, they sort of decided that they needed to be equally egalitarianly discriminatory, but it is addressed to a man. But what I really want to look at is this word toeva, or abomination, because it doesn't occur all that often in Torah, but it is the word that's used to describe what is eating shrimp or pork. Eating non-kosher food is a toeva. So according to the language of Torah, it is an equal transgression, right? Homosexual acts, eating shrimp, eating pork. I have to find the citation, but another one, yeah, there are other things that are like more obviously like, oh yeah, no, not cool to do. But also thrown into that toeva in Torah is wearing a garment made of linen and wool, shatnez, also a toeva, abomination, abhorrence. If we dig a little deeper into the book of Proverbs, also listed as a toeva, an abomination, are haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are swift in running to mischief, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. So it does beg the question, sort of like, who among us hasn't done any of those? And in addition to being put to death, you can also be put to death for collecting sticks on Shabbat, which is one of the prohibited Shabbat activities. So, but my favorite thing with these lines in Torah is to quote my teacher, Rabbi David Greenstein, also an ally, who says about the line, you shall not lie with a man as you would with a woman. It is an abomination. He would say, well, if you're gay, you would never lie with a man as you would with a woman. That would be an abomination.
That's interesting.
And that's really my favorite, because it absolutely acknowledges that people are not created in different ways. which may be a segue to other questions.
Well, I do want to ask you, or just bring up the fact that these things are also really, aren't they really about sex and not really about two people loving one another?
Yeah, yeah, no, and it was, I read a little too much, and I sort of like get into the weeds. I'm a little nerdy about this stuff. You don't get to be a rabbi without being a little nerdy about stuff. And yes, absolutely. And that was really kind of the big sticking point in the conservative movement, and why it took them so long to perform gay marriages, which they do, and ordain gay and lesbian rabbis, which they do, because they were differentiating between being gay, which they understood as, and we all understood, not we all, but in the reform movement, in the conservative movement, in the liberal movements of Judaism, we understand that being gay is not a choice. It's who you are. It's how you're made. It's part of what it means to be created in the image of God, right? Which is really interesting if we kind of go back to, that first line in Genesis, one of my favorite things. So differentiating between who you are and the acts that you do. So initially there was a differentiation between those two things, but eventually the line from Genesis where it says it's not good for a human being to be alone, right? This idea that people are meant to be in covenantal relationships with one another, that's what it means to be human, right? To love and to be in a relationship and to be in those intense, intimate relationships, that is also a Torah value. Well, if that's a Torah value and it is how you were created to be gay or lesbian, well, then that has to speak to the act. And so again, also in Judaism, sexual activity is never meant to only be for procreation, as it is in the Catholic Church, for example. Sexual activity within a covenantal relationship is seen as holy in and of itself. That intimacy, that touch, that physical release, that is part and parcel of what it means to be in a covenantal relationship, so that you can't separate that out. And from the beginning, the whole idea for procreation is just out of the picture Judaically. You can never make that argument from a Jewish perspective. Yeah. So that's how those who were having hiccups on that got over it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I'm gonna move us into these. We have these guidelines that I found on Keshet.org, which is a LGBTQ organization, and it's 7 Jewish values for inclusivity in Jewish community. And the first one, do you have that and printed out?
I do. I printed it out and everything.
Excellent. Do you want to just run with that? Although, actually, I want to bring up 2, because you and I, in our pre-conversation, we're talking tolerance versus acceptance.
Yeah, I'd take it even one further. I can't stand the word tolerance, right? Tolerance, the word tolerate, comes from tolerance. And it's like, I don't want people to be tolerated. I don't even want them to be accepted. I mean, accepted means like, well, okay, I'd rather go for sort of embracing.
Embracing is a nice word.
Yeah. I mean, I guess between tolerance and accepting, I'm definitely going to go for accepting. But I guess accepting's okay, right? We accept new members, right? But I think we embrace new members, don't we? We celebrate new members. We rejoice in new members, like no matter who you are, right? So this whole idea, I'm just like kind of going, okay, well, when do we use this term, right? So the idea that, we would just tolerate somebody's gender identity or sexual orientation is antithetical to this Jewish value, right? Of many of them. Well, is that in here? It's actually, I think, in all of these, right?
Yeah, I was looking at it and I was thinking tolerance sort of was the love love your neighbor as yourself. Do you?
Yeah, you know what? It's an interesting thing. Rabbi Akiva says, there's love your neighbor as yourself. And then, Rabbi Akiva comes in and says, well, what does that really mean? You can't really love everybody the same. You have to, right? You're not like saying, oh yeah, take all my blood, please. Yeah, I'll give you my house. No, it's like, so he said, what does that mean? He says, don't do to your neighbor what you don't want done to you.
Yeah.
So to me, that's kind of like the tolerance,
Yeah.
the loving your neighbor as yourself is more like the acceptance. I don't know where I was going with that. So maybe that's helpful, maybe not. Sorry.
Well, maybe my ideas are a little off, because I was thinking that was sort of tolerance, but the Betzelim Elohim, the made in the image of God, is more of acceptance.
Oh, that's an interesting place to go.
So I think we could just go down the sheet, and if people have questions, they can just throw them in there. How do you feel about that?
That's fine. Or what I thought maybe we could also do is we could read the values out loud and sort of throw it out there and ask how all of you sort of read that value into the discussion that we're having tonight. Does that sound like that might be a fun exercise?
So if someone wants to raise their hand and comment on
exactly.
it.
So the first one is kavod, which means respect. And right, so what we can read this, right? Judaism teaches us to treat ourselves and others with respect, even the strangers to be treated with respect. We can all define respect, but I think what I'd love to is anybody have any thoughts or a reaction to how respect may be manifest in Jewish community as it relates to our LGBTQ brothers and sisters.
Anybody want to comment?
Yeah, Joanna. Unmute.
I don't know, when I think about respect, it's basically saying my reality is not any better than yours, or my opinions or my choices. Not quite that, but I think it's kind of the foundation of all non-discriminatory behavior, I guess it would be.
Terrific.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. This idea that, like sort of who I am isn't where it all begins and ends.
Yeah. You in, Larry?
Yeah, I'm trying. I can't find my hand. So, it comes to me the opposite. The disrespect is sort of defines respect, because that's sort of that word right there. You don't want to disrespect anybody. And it sort of opens the door to respecting. I don't know if there's a word for that when it goes in that circle thing, but
we respect your opinion.
Well, thank you. Despite my sexual preference.
The next one is shalom bayit, which is peace in the home. This idea that the home is sacred, and of course, a synagogue is our spiritual home. It's a place where you can always come. It's in a place where you can always, sort of let down your hair a little bit. Where you can always, right? Home is where they always have to let you in, right?
There goes the letting in.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know if that's a good thing. Letting in, or take you back and give you a hug, and this idea of shalom, which of course is equanimity, right? This idea that there's a give and there's a take, and that there's always a reciprocity. Wondering if that's how that might speak to anyone else.
Anyone want to comment? Just unmute yourself. Go ahead, Stephanie.
So in order to welcome and respect, you have to have an awareness of other people. You have to have an empathy. So like this, the learning, the allowing, the empathy is kind of a basis of being able to do all those other things. So it would be like a teaching that have to teach how to connect and open your heart.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
B'Tselem Elohim is like so basic and also so broad. B'Tselem means that you're in the image and of God, so that this comes from the very, very first story of when humanity is created. It's Torah, right? It says, God created man and woman. God created them in the image of God, they were created. By the way, this is before there's even the creation of a gender. This is before Adam and anything separate from an Eve. This is the story of the creation of humanity. The Adam and Eve story and the rib and women coming out of rib, and that's the side, that comes in the next chapter. Right? The very first description of humanity's being created actually is this deliciously ambiguously sort of non-gendered sentence that very specifically mixes male and female and both in the same being, and says that this is what's created in the image of God. And this is the first humanity, which I just love, because it really deliciously says right there that, all of us are at our very base human. We're this soup. And where does man start and woman end? And how much of this are cultural constructs? How much of these are genetic constructs? The rabbis have a field day with this for thousands of years and really pull their hair out over gender. And some, simple people go, well, it's really clear, men are men and women are women, but it's not. It's not. And you don't have to be, you don't have to be gay or lesbian to understand that, we've all got tendencies that intersect and come back and forth. And that's how we are created. And that's how the Torah puts it out there from the very beginning. But as a value, this understanding that each and every human being, the way that they are created, davka, like de facto, is in the image of God, however they are. And that's how we are to approach them and recognize them, not in any kind of less than, or not any kind of more than. That's exactly why also, for example, Jews don't do Jesus, right? Because nobody can be any more or any less in the image of God. We're all a chip off that old divine block, as I'd like to say.
Yeah, isn't there some sort of story or teaching that you should treat someone right next to you, right, with respect, because it could be the Messiah?
Yes, there is. Yes,
so it could be a beggar person, could be someone that looks what you think is odd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are many great stories. Usually the person that goes to the monastery, you want the story? I mean, the one that I usually hear is that this monastery, it's like going out of business. Nobody comes, nobody prays. Even the monks are getting cranky. They're snipping at each other. And I don't know, the head monk, I forget what they're called, sort of goes to the shul, asking the rabbi for advice. The rabbi goes, I don't know what to tell you, really. But I can tell you one thing. One of you is the Messiah. And the monk goes back, it's like, what kind of crazy guy is this, And but he goes back, and all the monks go, what did the rabbi say? What did the rabbi say? And he says, he had this crazy idea that one of us is the Messiah. But it kind of like planted this little seed, and they all kind of thought to themselves, well, what if one of them is the Messiah? Oh, well, who could it be? Can't be Shlomi, he slurps his soup. It can't be, it can't be Jose, he's walks a little limp. I don't know anybody, but then they realized that if they have no idea who, because there's something wrong with all of them, they're all a little bit annoying. But if one of them is the Messiah, then over time, they just started treating each other with more and more respect and more kindness and more dignity. And things got to be really joyful around the place. And, their prayers became that much more resonant, and their motivation to do good deeds became even that much more, enthusiastic. And people started coming to the monastery, and it started growing and revitalizing. And the story goes is, and from that is when the Messiah comes. So it's this story that, it's like, oh, when you start looking at one another as every person could be, you never know. You don't know what comes out of it.
I love that story. So let's hit the next one.
Oh, yeah. Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh. So literally that means that each Jew is responsible for one another. It gets expanded in the liberal world. It means like all human beings who are really responsible for one another. I like to say, it's like we create the communities that we want to live in. And that means we each have to step up to be a model for the kind of person that we want to be in the community that we want to inspire. But also, and I want to throw this out here, it also means that if we hear injustice or bigotry, that, what is it? They came for the gypsies, but I wasn't a gypsy. They came for the disabled people. This is the Nazis, of course, but I wasn't disabled, so I didn't say anything. They came for I don't know, who else did the Nazis come after?
The gay men.
Right, the communists, but I wasn't a communist, so I didn't say anything. They came for the homosexuals. I wasn't a homosexual, so I didn't say anything. Came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't say anything. And then there was nobody left. I think I probably botched that one up, but what's the punchline of that one? No, but this understanding that,
you didn't stand up for anyone, so there was no one left to stand up for you.
Exactly. I wonder if anybody else hears that in a way that speaks to them, especially as it relates to not tolerating, maybe accepting, but definitely celebrating and embracing LGBTQ brothers and sisters, and all, really.
I think there are issues in the LGBTQ communities where even transgender people think that gays and lesbians don't. We kind of have sometimes think this hierarchy of groups within the umbrella of that.
Yeah, I actually was reading, and maybe somebody can illuminate this for me, but I actually read an article recently in the bi of people who are bi, but they're afraid to come out as bi because they're going to be discriminated against by gay or lesbian people, as well as by straight people, because like gay and lesbian think you have to choose.
Yeah.
And straight people just, like, I don't know, don't get it, whatever. And so there's more discrimination there than, well, and it often goes underreported because they don't know where to go.
Yeah. A lot of gay and lesbians think that they just haven't decided yet, which is not true. It's okay to love who you want to love.
Yeah, it's not.
And we should know that above all else.
Yeah, I don't know, does it show respect for who a person is or their process or, who they love?
True.
Anyway, I thought that was a very interesting article.
Yeah. Anyone have any comments, questions so far? All right. We'll go to the next one, Rabbi.
Shmirat Lashon, Shmirat HaLashon, which is guarding one's use of language. And maybe we can talk more about this, right? Here it says, the Talmud warns us that we have to take care how we use language, and talking about others behind their backs, even if what we're saying is true, is prohibited. And the guidelines of how we watch our tongue remind us that what we say about others affects them in ways that we can never predict. Words can hurt or heal depending on how we use them. A lot of ink spilled in the sources about that.
Well,
And-
isn't there the story of, is it Miriam? Who says something bad and then she gets a rash the next day?
Oh yeah, that's Miriam. Yeah, she's talking trash about Moses' husband, Moses' wife. Yeah, slip there. Moses' wife. Yeah, yes.
So be careful. You might have a rash the next day.
Exactly. No, but we could take that a step further, right? In terms of the terms that we use. And then like, you have she, her, and I have she, he on mine, and other people, not necessarily tonight, but on their taglines, and it's very much a real conversation, right? So about how we label people, pronouns that we use, terms that we use, presumptions that we use in language.
Yeah,
So-
that's for some of us, and I hope everyone doesn't mind that I'm just going to speak frankly. I mean, people of a certain age, we're getting used to this type of language, the pronouns and the identities, because me growing up, I just called everyone gay. That was my umbrella term. But now I know that, putting out your gender identity is actually supporting others by doing that, and allowing them to be able to be free to let people know that it's okay, that their identity is okay, whatever it is.
Joanna, you have something you want to add?
I was just gonna say, something interesting happened recently with an old acquaintance of mine. That he was kind of like, I always perceived him to be super liberal, but then now keep in mind he's my age, but in the 90s there used to be this expression, and people didn't even consider it offensive. Oh, that's so gay, that's so gay. And he actually put something out on Facebook recently. It was like, he used to use it, and I kind of correct him sometimes, but I'm ashamed to say not always, and he was like, said something on Facebook like, my son's come out as gay. And I think back how it was such a throwaway, horrible thing. It was like literally just kind of slang. And he was like, like kind of reflecting back on himself, how these things that are considered, and this is like, this guy that considers himself fairly left-wing, etc., but he just was a term he used in the 90s, and kind of, that's, I think, a good example of that, kind of the power of language, that he would never say that now, not only because he's hopefully grown as a human, but also could affect his own child.
Sure.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different people that get triggered by different words. I've had to get used to the term queer, because for me, queer growing up was a bad word. And now that's more the umbrella term,
Yeah.
than gay is. And I'm getting used to it and open to getting used to it. But yeah, but I think that all of this, it's important to let people know that they can express those issues with you. If you use a term and it bothers you, that you can say that term bothers me, and the other person not take it in a bad way, and educate yourself, and be respectful. We'll go back to the respectful.
Yeah. And I think it goes both ways, because people, we have to have a tremendous amount of respect for people who, and compassion and love for people who have spent so much of their life, being on the receiving end of discriminatory either language or actions. And as you said, Beth, it's like queer is a word that triggers you,
Yeah.
right? So there's also like, okay, if somebody uses queer because they feel like they're being, au courant and using the best word that they can possibly be, and they don't know it triggers you, right? So just like, you can say as a gay woman, right? You say, wow, that triggers me. And so, everybody can be triggered in any way, and so we all have to be sort of open and patient with each other. I have a friend whose child, who is now almost a trans man. My friend is really supportive and open and transitioning along with her child. And sometimes she forgets and uses the wrong pronoun. And that, of course, can be really triggering. Her child can see that as disrespectful or not accepting. But also for my friend, who is the mother, she's going to make a mistake every once in a while. It doesn't come out of disrespect. So you hope that, they're both kind of understand that people evolve along with each other, and that, you give somebody, the space to go, oops, sorry, and not presume that that's, meant to be a disrespectful thing.
The trans people that I've known are usually a bit understanding of that, especially if you're making that effort, and you just, of course you're going to slip up. You've been saying that pronoun for all those years.
Right. I changed your diaper.
Larry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just that, I think there's a difference when it's a mistake, and I think people love one another, they can get through it. But there's been, and probably still continues to be, a lot of judges in courtrooms that refuse to acknowledge the pronouns that are wanted by people going through divorces or child custody, or, mostly, adversarial kind of proceedings for, a variety of reasons, but obviously to sort of put everybody in their own category and really disrespect the people. And so it's a battle. It's a battle in the law, and it's, that's where disrespect in that regard is really
unconscionable.
Yes.
While we're on the topic, I just want to mention, sort of in the Jewish community, it's a very active conversation. So, like, for example, like, all of us have Hebrew names, and if you're either changing genders, or what if you don't want to settle in on a gender, I'm known as so-and-so daughter of, or son, so-and-so son of. Well, what if I am gender fluid? What if I use they, and I consciously want it to stay there? What do you do with your Hebrew name? And so it's a very active, live conversation about how you name somebody, or how you can rename somebody that honors that. And there are a number of things that we can use instead of daughter of or son of. My favorite is, it says mi beit, which is from the house of, right? I'm Me'ira Leah from the house of Feivel Gershon and Shoshana Ruth. Or you can use a last name, but more typical, it's your parents' names.
I love that. And this was a question I was going to ask you if you didn't bring it up. So I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah. So that, or, from the family of, and there are a number of different versions. I stick on that one because I just think it's so poetic, from the house of, yeah. Because, just like French and Spanish, Hebrew is a gendered language, right? A table has a gender. It's like, that's how ridiculous it is. So this, the verbs change, and English is, believe it or not, is a much more egalitarian language in that way than Hebrew, just in its basic structure. But it doesn't mean that there aren't active conversations to figure out how to do it. But, it certainly hasn't taken much root in like typical Israeli conversation, but it is in rabbinic circles as it relates to this stuff. Of course, God language has been under scrutiny, for decades, mercifully.
Right. Well, most people tend to say he when referring to God.
You know what's fabulous? None of my bar mitzvah kids do that. Very few of them. Mostly the boys. Okay. But and what if they want to refer to them as she or they or just plain old God or the divine? I'm like, go for it. And whenever somebody comes up with like the knee-jerk he, I always go, we're not really understanding God as a he, right? So it's really great because every single bar mitzvah kid that I've had, this generation is so past that, so past that, walking in, and I just love that.
That's great, because it goes back to that beginning creation thing. If they made Adam in God's image and Adam was both genders, then that right, that would mean that God would be sort of
God includes, but really what we say is God includes, but really transcends gender. God is just all that stuff. But yes. So I love that. It gives me faith in this next generation. They don't even go there.
I wanted to. Oh, let's go. I know we had 2 more things on the list, but we can backtrack to those because we're talking gender identity, and I just wanted to let people know. In 2015, the Union of Reform Judaism, which is what Temple Beth-El falls under, we're a Reform synagogue, adopted a resolution on the rights of transgender and gender nonconforming people, affirming full equality, inclusion, and acceptance of people of all gender identities and gender expressions. So I was going to bring up Adam, but you've so nicely already done that. But I want to talk these Jewish texts that discuss 6 different gender categories.
Yeah.
Can you enlighten us on that, Rabbi?
Yes. So the rabbis of the Mishnah, so we're talking at least 2,000 years ago, they've been chatting about this because they got that it doesn't just get bifurcated male or female. And look, from the perspective of the rabbis, they're legalists at heart. God bless them, right? And they want to, so what category do we put you in? Because if you're a man, you're responsible for this. And if you're a woman, you're responsible for that, or you're not responsible for this. So that's where their mindset. So, they really get into the weeds with this, but I'm actually going to bring it up if that's okay, because I found it so nicely written out. It's actually, I think, a 3-part study session of diversity, LGBTQ, and Judaism. If you wanted to do this 3-session thing, we could talk about it. I think it would be fun. But everybody see this? What I'm looking at?
Yes.
All right. So one is zachar, right? This term is actually derived from the word for a pointy sword and refers to the phallus. It is usually translated as male in English. So we get kind of literal here. Nekeva. This term is derived from the word for a crevice and probably refers to a vaginal opening. It's usually translated as female in English. Zachar and nekeva. It's usually, male and female. But then the Mishnah understands that there's some people that can be defined as androgynous, and that they define as a person who's both male and female, both has male and female sexual characteristics. There are 149 references in the Mishnah and the Talmud, 350 references in the classical Midrash and Jewish law codes. So if you're thinking that this is sort of like this sort of, it's never really talked about, it's out there. And we have the tumtum. And this is a person whose sexual characteristics are indeterminate or obscured. 181 references in the Mishnah, 335 in the Talmud, classical Midrash, and Jewish law codes. Then there's the Elonit, a person who's identified as female at birth but develops male characteristics at puberty, and is infertile. These are not only, these are not only people that lived 2,000 years ago. These are still people that are very much with us today. These are real human conditions. 80 references in Mishnah, Talmud, 40 in the classical Midrash and the codes. And then there's the Saris, who's a person who's identified as male at birth, but develops female characteristics at puberty and or is lacking a penis. A Saris can be naturally a Saris, that's a Saris Chama, or can become one through human intervention, which is Saris Adam. 156 references in Mishnah and Talmud, and 379 in Jewish law codes. Just a curious thing. These Sarises, these eunuchs, that's often, that's how it's translated in the Book of Esther, the story of Purim, right? Because King Ahasuerus, enlightened monarch that he is not, has his harem guarded by these eunuchs. So clearly they are these eunuchs by human hand. He trusts his harem only to castrated males.
And isn't it, I forget where I read it was from, that God promises the eunuchs to build a monument up in heaven because they are childless.
Oh, I don't know that one, but that's beautiful.
I have it somewhere. I've messed up my cards.
Yeah, that's lovely. Although it is somewhat disrespectful to people that don't choose to have children, which is, a choice as well.
It's in Isaiah.
Right. Yeah. No, biblically speaking, like they don't get, what a life is without children, which is, we've evolved since then.
It's interesting to me that all these genders are there, but it took till 2015 to pass some reform to not discriminate against these people in the Reformed Church. I mean, synagogue, sorry.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's been, we talk now like we're such an enlightened people, generation, even, denomination. But truth is that we're all evolving. We're all figuring it out, right? For ourselves individually, for our families, for our culture, for our communities. And that's why we have these principles. That's why we have these values, right? They're eternal. So we say, okay, we have these values and we have to apply them to everybody. So then how do we do this? But it's modern. It's modern, which is, look, we're all over 30 in this group. I dare say over 40.
Larry, you have something you want to say?
What I was thinking is, that it's not modern and that people have existed in all shapes and forms forever because it's in the Bible, it's in the Torah, and so we've been here and people have recognized it and they've acknowledged it. And, the discrimination comes in and out over years that, sometimes it's people are not so, accepted and sometimes people are more accepted, but, in terms of the norm. But it's definitely, there's been a very integrated society of people loving people.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was, I guess for a long time, it was kind of don't ask, don't tell. Right? We know those people exist.
But,
we just don't have to talk about it.
Well, I used to have this therapist, and she used to live in Michigan, and she used to talk about these two guys that she grew up with that lived down the block, and everyone just accepted that they were married to each other. I mean, it was not that they didn't talk about it. It was just, it just was. It was just was.
Just was.
Yeah.
But they didn't have the same rights as everybody else.
Right. Well, no, that in the legal sense, right? But maybe in
it's interesting that you say in the Bible. I don't know if you were going to talk about sort of the Book of Ruth and David.
No, I'm ready for that.
All right, go for
it. You're very good tonight, Rabbi. You're just jumping right into the stuff that I have questions about.
Cool.
So we're going to talk about, I call them gay moments in the Tanakh. So I have David, the story of David and Jonathan in the Book of Samuel. I have Jacob wrestling with the angel all night long. Some people think that that's a homoerotic thing. Some people talk about Joseph possibly being gay because he was kind of picked on by all his brothers, and he cried a lot, and he was just kind of like the odd man.
And he was colorful
With his coat.
Interesting that you would bring that up, because the physical description of Joseph is a very feminine description. It says, like he's beautiful, Yafet Toar, he's beautiful to gaze upon.
Yes.
So, it's interesting that I wouldn't have thought of that one, but now that you bring that up, yeah. Not sure I'm going with you with the Jacob wrestling with the angel, but do want
That's okay. That's
okay.
Something, but I don't actually know very much about the story of David and Jonathan. Can you give us a little summary of?
So the King David, right? So David has this huge libido. He's married to several women at the same time during the course of his life. He's a political animal, and he takes over the kingship from King Saul. King Saul is the first king of Israel, and King Saul, his heir apparent is his son Jonathan. That's where the name comes from. And David and Jonathan love each other. And the Torah text is really, really unambiguous with the words that they use to describe their relationship, their attraction, their bond, their dedication to one another, in a number of different places. And if you're interested in this, what I would highly recommend that you do is take out your Tanakh and read the first book of Samuel and the second book of Samuel. Mostly it's in the first book. And then go in Wikipedia, David and Jonathan, and then and see what they have to say. So I've got a couple of highlights. So when they first meet, if you're interested, 1 Samuel 18, the biblical narrator describes Jonathan as feeling something that can only be defined as love at first sight. He's immediately attracted by his beauty. So immediately it's telling you that there is an immediate attraction, and it's physical right there. Saul berates, King Saul berates Jonathan for his friendship in Samuel, in the book. Says, why do you lower yourself to this? I don't have the whole, I'd have to read like too much, but
yeah.
They profess undying love for one another. So when it's clear that David is going to be king, and it's not going to be Jonathan, it actually happens because Jonathan betrays his father because of his love for David. Saul's a little bit of a nut, but nonetheless, the relationship is so strong that Jonathan, sacrifices his own kingship so that David can be king. And in that, they come up with this sort of ruse. What a cutie pie. Dogs always steal the show. And in that, they bind themselves, their hearts, their souls to one another in perpetuity. So this is right there, clear in the language of the Torah. The relationship surpasses Jonathan's death because, remember, Jonathan would have been king, but David becomes king instead. but David kind of, I'm not gonna say quite adopts, but brings Jonathan's son, who of course would have been third in line to the throne. And instead of killing him as you would kill off any rival, he brings him into court as if he's sort of like this adopted son because of the relationship that he had with his father, who was Jonathan. And then when Jonathan dies, you hear this lament in these unvarnished words of love from David. The Torah actually says that Jonathan's love for David is stronger than the love of a woman. That's literally from the Bible. Saul exclaims publicly at the dinner table, excoriating his son, "I know you have chosen the son of Jesse," that's David, "which is a disgrace to yourself and the nakedness of your mother." So, he publicly says, you're choosing this man, right? Which is a disgrace, at least what we say. Saul's a little bit of a nut. And if you look at the words closely, the choosing, bahar, indicates a permanent choice and a firm relationship. And the mention of nakedness, erva, could also be interpreted to convey a negative sexual nuance, giving the impression that Saul was seeing something indecent in Jonathan and David's relationship, or indicating that it was so obvious that and so very public.
That sounds like a Lifetime movie.
Yeah. Well, to biblical scholars and to, sort of serious, gay and lesbian, textual analysis, there's a lot of ink spilt about that, because it's so obvious. I mean, people bring up other things, like the other things that you brought up. It's like, yeah, okay.
Stretching.
It's a little bit of a stretch and you can see that, but this is like, it's really obvious. Which I think is really interesting because it's like, why is like David going from woman to woman and woman to woman? It's like, well, maybe it's because he's not really into women. He's got to like marry them for convenience and for whatever. And, but who he really wants to be with is a man, Jonathan. Jonathan's dead after a while, but whatever, so there's a lot you can read into that.
I got to read that.
Oh yeah, totally.
All right. So another stretch, because I mentioned this to you the other day and you were like, but the Book of Ruth.
Yeah.
Who knows the Book of Ruth? Larry?
Give us a little synopsis. Who's Ruth?
Whither thou goest.
But
so we know that Ruth was the daughter-in-law of Naomi and was married to her son. And when her son died, she was supposed to go back to her tribe or family or whatever. And she said, no, I'm going to go with you and take care of you, basically. And so that's the whither thou goest. But,
you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Where you're buried, I'm buried. Where you go, I go.
Right. So it's a total acceptance of a lot of different things. And I think, women loved, the passage because it just sort of, it bonded two women, but it was, always a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, but, the love was big. And we're just talking about, sometimes it's about love and it's not about sex,
No, and I think you're right that Naomi had a real love for her mother-in-law and a connection there. The reason that I go is because it was not reciprocated. I mean, so it was Ruth who loved her mother-in-law, Naomi. But Naomi from the very beginning is trying to get rid of her. Says, go back to your people, please. Basically, she says, look, you're a liability. I really, don't come with me. I'm not going to be able to take care of you. I don't want you. Follow your sisters-in-law because they really have it, right? And throughout the book of Ruth, she's kind of like, I don't want to be seen with you. You're a liability. I mean, the truth is also that Ruth is a Moabite, right? And Moabites are despised among the Israelites. So she's like showing up in this time of famine. She's an old woman. She's got nothing, right? She's bringing a liability. And oh yeah, she's a Moabite. So the whole thing is like kind of Naomi trying to keep her distance, but it's Ruth's, and which is why Ruth is held up as such a pillar of love in general, but also of women, because despite how kind of crappy her mother-in-law is to her, she is dedicated and devoted and doesn't leave her side and makes sure she always has something to eat. But in terms of like, do I see this as sort of like, lesbian love, or, this feminine idealized relationship? I don't. So that's where I'm going to go to David and Jonathan, where I see, there's an attraction, there's a covenant, there's promise. It's like saying you're better than any woman, there, and that it's public enough for he to be outed about the whole thing, and nonetheless they're still devoted to each other, and to that and publicly in that way, it goes into the next generation. Like David doesn't do anything to disassociate himself from that, even when he's outed. And to me, that's beautiful.
I agree. I think that, and I mentioned this to you the other day, I think that Book of Ruth thing, a lot of that has to do with the movie Fried Green Tomatoes, which is a story of two women. One of them is married and the other one is not. She's a very feisty woman. And the one that's married, the husband is beating her and stuff. And the feisty one, when the husband, the married one wants to leave her husband, and the feisty one helps her leave him. And she says this line from the Book of Ruth: wherever you go, I go. And they never actually come out in this movie and say that they're gay, but they're obviously in love.
Mm.
So I think a lot of lesbians of a certain age probably are like, Book of Ruth.
Well, there's so little that we could grab onto in this patriarchal, tone. So we people grabbed for it. There was love from a woman to a woman. And maybe it was one way, but it was the little bits and pieces, the crumb that we could grab to. It's hard.
It's beautiful.
And my mother always said,
but you muted yourself.
You muted yourself on the important part.
What did your mother always say? You're still muted.
My mother always said, you have to deal with in-laws no matter who you're with or what your situation.
I'm gonna segue us somewhere else. We're gonna talk rainbow flags and rainbow colors. So in 1978, Gilbert Baker had created the rainbow flag for San Francisco's Gay Freedom Day parade. And his inspiration derived from many things, but I was reading an interview with him today, and he mentions Genesis 9. God makes a covenant with Noah and says that and I'm just sort of paraphrasing this, and Rabbi, if you want to correct me, please do, that I'm making a pact with you, and whenever you see it's translated as bow, but the word is keshet, correct? Whenever you see this keshet in the sky, it's my promise with you, and every little living thing on earth, because he's just put Noah and all the creatures and everything through the flood because there was all this sin, right? And he flooded them all out. So this is God saying, I'm never going to do that to you again. And my promise is whenever you see this sign, this bow, keshet, rainbow, that I promise you that I'll never do that again.
Mm-hmm.
Did I get that sort of right?
Mm-hmm. And so how did Gilbert associate this line, this from Genesis, with the meaning behind the flag?
He didn't really specify in the interview. He was just saying that the rainbow kept coming up for him in different areas. And he mentioned back like Egyptian Egyptian things and Chinese things, and then somewhere over the rainbow.
Which
But
is
I just thought it was interesting that we were going to have this talk about Judaism and LGBTQ communities. And here's Gilbert Baker talking about Genesis 9.
yeah.
And so when he made the flag, there were 8 colors. And each of those colors signified something like harmony or healing or nature. And you had mentioned to me about this rainbow talit. And first of all, I'd like, because we have some non-Jewish people here, if you could explain what a talit is, and then what the rainbow talit, where that came from, and what some of the colors on that signified.
Yeah. So I think there really is a connection. It's a profound connection. We're gonna have to. We have to peel a couple layers back of some onions, which is all good. Start with thank you. Yes, a talit. The talit is a prayer shawl. It's a garment that Jews wear for their morning prayers, and traditionally, like before 19, when I wrote it down, let's say before 1960-ish, 62. When you see a talit, well, first of all, they were always only worn by men, which it no longer is the case. Women most definitely wear, in Hebrew, talitot, or in Yiddish, talesim. That's the plural. Women definitely wear them. And sort of traditionally, and definitely, before the 1960s, they'd have a stripe, and they'd usually be a black stripe or black stripes or blue stripes, so you could get them plain, plain white wool. But certainly they weren't expressions of color or individuality or personality or meaning. They were pretty, bare bones. My teacher, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, in the 1960s, and I looked this up, he spoke at Yale University, and in lieu of monetary payment, he was given the opportunity to design a talit, a prayer shawl, for himself, woven by the students, actually out of reindeer wool. Not sure where that comes. And he chose the colors of the rainbow for his talit. And that is actually the genesis of the rainbow talit. And you can, Google rainbow talit. You can read the stories and you can see the originals. And there've been knockoffs. It's been 50 years, it's almost 60 years. So plenty's gone on since then. But now I fully appreciate that Gilbert had, 8 colors. But there are 7 colors in the rainbow. So that's okay. Like whatever, that's fine. So I'm going to stick with 7 for now anyway. Because I think 7 is a really meaningful number in what it is that we're talking about. And also how why Reb Zalman designed this talit in the rainbow. We know what it's like, right? We've looked through a prism. Everybody see a prism? And what we see is like all normal, what we look at. When we look at a prism, we see that it's really made up of 7 distinct colors. And it's only in its totality is it complete. So the colors of the rainbow actually sort of shine a flashlight on the diversity that is the reality of our world. Right? So actually, and so that, in the Kabbalistic and the mystical way of looking at it, that's like God's eye view, right? It's being able to see the nuance and the distinction and still make it a unified whole. So, that he looked at that line in Genesis and said that rainbow, that's the symbol of my covenant with humanity, my covenant with the world, with all of it in its totality, I think is a really profound connection. Now, Reb Zalman, when he designed his rainbow talit, he said that he chose the 7 colors of the rainbow because 7 in Jewish, of course, is the number of wholeness. It's the number of completion. It's the number of perfection, right? And it kind of works, right? It's like with those 7 colors of the rainbow, that is wholeness, that is completion, but there's still those colors that are in there. But being the ever mystic that he is, he interpreted even deeper by saying that the 7 colors of the rainbow are representative of the 7 lower spherotes. So in Kabbalistic language, there are 10 emanations of God. There are 10 spherot. There are 10, if you will, colors, nuances that make up the reality map of the whole. But the top 3 cannot even be, they can't be sensed by humanity. Humanity, they're so high up, they're so in the realm of God that we can't recognize them. Imagine a color that we've never seen, it could never describe. Well, there are 3 of them. Okay. Like, I don't know. Could there be a color that nobody's ever seen before? I always wonder about that, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, right? Who, and how would you describe it if you saw it? I don't know. Anyway.
That would be a good art show.
Wouldn't it? Yeah. Right? So.
You guys heard it here.
Yes, exactly. So that, to me, that's like a mystery of mysteries. Like, is there a color that no humanity has ever seen before? Nonetheless, there are 7 spherotes that are that can be perceived by human, and sort of the flow, the divine flow that moves, through the universe from the Godhead, if you will, from divinity, that makes manifest finally through Shekhinah, which is, of course, the divine emanation that is most associated with the feminine. That's synthesis. So by the time it goes through all of these 10, 3 above, 7 below, that's how it's synthesized in such a way, that we can perceive it. And each color of the talit, each color of the rainbow, is one of these emanations that we can actually perceive.
I might put that on my Hanukkah list.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was great. Thank you for sharing that. So we have about 10 minutes. I want to just tell you guys about Jersey City Pride that's coming up. If you want information, you can go to jerseycitypride.com, because they're actually having events like over the next couple of weeks. Like, there's plenty of stuff that you can do. The actual Pride event is Saturday, August 21st from 1 to 6 p.m. That's downtown on the Newark Pedestrian Plaza. It's going to be a little smaller than it was in the past because of COVID, but it is still happening. And just personally, on a personal note, on Friday, August 13th, I know it's Shabbat, but there's a light up Pride bike ride. It starts at 7:30, but at 9 p.m., they're unveiling an art installation at the Jersey City Library downtown. And I created a piece. I'm the indigo stripe of a Gilbert Baker colored flag. So if you're not going to synagogue, you can come by. I'm going to open it up for discussion and questions, or just comments about, did we miss something? Do you want to bring something up that we missed? We have like 10 minutes. Joanna, are you trying to say something?
Trying. I feel so Gen X. It's like I can't quite get it. I find, first of all, that was so great. Thank you so much for doing this, both of you. I think one of the questions I have to either of you or to the group is like, when, like, for instance, when I told my friends and family I was converting to Judaism, they're like, oh, some of people were like, why would you ever embrace organized religion is so homophobic and da, 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 da. And so I wonder what would be a good resource if you wanted to kind of explain to somebody, my experience at least, it doesn't need to be that way.
This is the homophobic part?
Yeah, I think a lot of people perceive organized religion as just somehow, I know this, I'm not being very articulate tonight, I apologize. But
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people, especially, again, people of a certain age, kind of were turned off on organized religion because they were told that, I'm talking LGBTQ individuals, that they were made to feel that they were bad people because it was against these things that we were talking about in Leviticus. And that's, we share that section of the Bible in both Christian religions and Jewish religions, but we've kind of turned the page, and I have a long list of dates. Judaism has been sort of whittling away at being more accepting. Rabbi, am I?
Well, it's interesting, so I have a lot of anti, after 9 o'clock, or it gets to be 9 o'clock and my vocabulary just goes misogynistic. That's usually the first thing that people complain about, established an organized religion, more than the homophobia. But they're equally there in history. But so what I'd like to do is sort of punt a little bit, and if you ask me for a couple of great titles for the misogyny, I've got for that. But I want to look into a good title that specifically and exclusively sort of addresses the homophobia and debunks that. So I'm going to follow up with you on that, finding the title there.
And maybe I answering my own question, which is that maybe if I become more learned and more articulate about why it's not, that probably is the best defense, to be able to discuss things intelligently and
Right.
things.
I mean, you can tell them that in every major liberal denomination that gay and lesbian women, gay and lesbian people are ordained as rabbis, or lead congregations, and that rabbis, gay or straight, don't blink an eye at performing same-sex weddings.
Yeah.
I mean, a conservative rabbi would sooner do a gay and lesbian wedding for two Jews than an intermarriage between a man and a woman. And that's true.
Right.
So kind of that right there, is well, that's been going on since the late 80s, or actually the 70s, right? That, what was it that we found? The first gay and lesbian synagogue is since 1972.
Yep.
Yeah.
1977, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the Union for Reform Judaism, called for legislation decriminalizing homosexual acts. That was 1977.
Yeah, sort of getting into the political sphere, saying this is just...
And even ahead, gay marriage wasn't legalized till 2015, but in conservative, reform was a little bit ahead of conservative, but in 2012, did we say? Conservative synagogues could perform same-sex marriages, and reform was a little bit before that. So
yeah, and
they were ahead of the courts.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely ahead of the courts, being proactive about it. It's not oh yeah, well, I guess we have to. It's sort of it was actually pushing the political reform. And
we had Jonathan and David in our...
Yes. No, and I remember 25 years ago, it's really interesting. I had an Israeli colleague. Again, we're nerds. I put it out there, right? And he wrote his senior thesis on how it is that he could perform a legal, fully halachic Jewish wedding, and without being either disingenuous to the gender, same sex, or the halacha, which demanded, you know, that there were two different genders. So he like parsed it. He actually created this wedding in the language of partnership. Like the Jewish legal, I'm getting too nerdy, I get it, I'll stop. But this was 25 years ago that you know, he was like figuring this out. And you know, it's like,
well, just so people know, the ketubah, which is the contract that two people sign when two Jewish people sign when they get married, the original language was about the husband and the wife. So that had to be changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Joanna, I have a resource sheet, a PDF that I'm going to send out. If you want it, because I'm not sure that everyone on here registered or not. But if you put your email, if you want it, put your email in the chat. I'll email it to you. And it's not just links to websites. Some of them are actually articles from the Reformed Judaism. I forgot what it's called, but articles about LGBT equality and a few things. So maybe you could breeze through some of those and maybe find.
You know what else I'm going to send you, Joanna?
You're going to be bombarded.
I'm going to send you the lesson plan for the 3-session thing, the 3-session study on, you know, gender diversity, sexual diversity. There's a lot of good resources in there too.
I like that too.
Okay. Well, if we do the sessions, yeah, I'll send it to you, and we can see if we can, you know, turn that into, you know, a study thing. I have a question for everybody, because I think it's just so important that Temple Beth-El is like loud and clear that, you know, we're not tolerant, we're not accepting, but we're embracing of all. And, you know, of course, that includes LGBTQ brothers and sisters. So my question is, you know, is there something else we could or should be doing to make sure that that message is unambiguous?
You and I talked about it, Rabbi, and I'm going to look into it for us. We can get training and be able to become a safe zone. And they give you stickers that you can put out that people can publicly see, and they know that you've been trained and that it's a self-welcoming space for LGBTQ individuals, which I think is kind of neat.
Thank you. And if there are any other sort of, I don't know, ideas or comments, send them my way.
Yeah. We're all good. God, thank you everyone
Good job.
for
Thank you so much.
spending the last hour and a half with us.
Fabulous.
Beth and Rabbi. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi, for
You. We'll pick these back up after the high holidays. We all kind of catch our breath.
yes.
So,
All right.
haven't already renewed, and if that is on your agenda so as to be able to join us for high holiday, please do.